On this episode of Locked On Lightning, we're taking a look at the trade deadline 1 month later. Is there a long-term deal in the works for Anthony Duclair? And then we wrap things up with expectations for Mikhail Sergachev. All that coming up and more on Locked On Lightning.
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to another episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Adam Danker. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Locked On Lightning. Today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. Indeed knows when you're growing your own business, you have to make every dollar count. That's why with Indeed, you only pay for quality applications that match your must-have requirements. Visit Indeed.com/lockedon. Start hiring now. Terms and conditions apply. On this episode of Locked On Lightning, we're talking about the trade deadline. It's been pretty much a 1 month since that has passed. We're talking, just reflecting back on it and what it has done for this Lightning team. We also discuss a long-term deal for Anthony Duclair. Well-deserved, absolutely. Will it happen? We'll talk about that, as well as diving into expectations for Mikhail Sergachev when he does indeed come back, whenever that may be. But before we dive into any of those topics, please, I humbly ask you to go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're also available on YouTube, so go ahead, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification button, and drop a comment below. So we're talking about the trade deadline. We're starting things off there. I thought, we might take a break from talking in-game, having in-game podcasts and talking about the game. Lightning are up right now in this one, point and Sherry goals. But the more important thing, today is April 11th. So a little over a month has passed us by since the trade deadline. And that has been really, I think, when we look back on it, especially, and I think really it doesn't matter what happens, really. I think that Stanley Cup or not, we could still look at this season with fond memories. We could look at this season as a very integral part of Lightning history, because when we look back on this season, we'll obviously talk about Nikita Kucherov, the season he is having, up to 140 points this year. Now, as of tonight, more possibly to come as this game goes on. But we'll also talk about, when we're talking about Kucherov's season, is how obviously he started off really carrying the brunt of this team. And then we'll talk about, after the trade deadline, how things really changed quite quickly for this Lightning team. I mean, when you really look after the deadline, whether you truly believe the moves that were made at the deadline really helped the Lightning turn it around and really change things very quickly, or you just feel like it's just a coincidence. I mean, I'm sure there's some Lightning fans that feel that way. But there's no denying, when you look at the players that Julian Brisebois brought in, and when I talk about, I'm not talking about Adam Henrique. I'm not, I'm talking about Anthony Duclair. I'm talking about Matt Dumba, especially Anthony Duclair. I mean, Matt Dumba has really played phenomenally well and has really helped this back end for the Tampa Bay Lightning quite a lot since he arrived in Tampa Bay. But I think it's really a good time to take a look at this deadline a month later, because you don't know in the following months, especially the following weeks, especially the month of March. This could just be a flash in the pan kind of moment. But here we are, like I said, on April 11th. And at least from my point of view, I could confidently say this team got significantly better at the trade deadline. And as we all know, or if you're joining the party for the first time, first of all, welcome. But as you all know, going into the trade deadline, there was really, it was kind of swing for the fences or nothing for this Tampa Bay Lightning team. I think everybody was really focusing on two names going into the deadline: Sean Walker and Noah Hannafin. And obviously the Lightning did not land either of those players, especially Hannafin, who I think was really the golden goose for a lot of teams that were looking to add one more player. But you don't know. You don't know how he would have fit in with this Lightning team. Quite frankly, I don't know how he's fitting in with Vegas. I mean, he just signed an 8-year deal worth $58 million, and that's great. And I guess the salary cap just doesn't exist. It's just an imaginary thing out in Vegas. But you don't know how that would have been able to shake up things in a positive way for the Lightning at the deadline. But for all the crap that I have given, and all of us have given Julien Brisebois over the past year, because let's face it, as much as we want to get past the whole Tanner Jeannot thing, he's here. He is playing well, yes, and that's not his fault as the controversy that's going around. He could only go out there and play to the ceiling of his ability, and he has. But I have to say, Julien Brisebois is starting to really develop, if he hasn't already, develop really a reputation for just pulling off very, very incredible trades. I mean, even the best GMs miss them every now and then. The Jeannot one, obviously, we all know. We don't have to rehash all of that. But looking back on this trade deadline, Matt Dumba, what he brings to the team, that grit, that sandpaper, that leadership mentality. He's been around the league a very long time. A guy that still has a very, very much a lot of pep in his step. And then on the other side of that, you got Anthony Duclair. Obviously, that is the golden star of the trade deadline for the Tampa Bay Lightning. That is really, when we look back on that season, we're going to think about, on this season, we're going to think about Anthony Duclair and what he has brought to this team, and really just how different this team looks with the number 10 on the roster, because make no mistake about it, he has really helped this team. I mean, I'm not saying he's the whole reason. I'm not saying he is really the game changer, but he is, sometimes when you're trying to find the right recipe, you got to add a little spice. Okay. And he definitely brings the flavor to this team. He could do pretty much anything on the ice that you ask him to do of. And sprinkle in the fact that he's been in the league for over a decade now. And the fact that he has a ton of experience. I said at the deadline, and we have seen it. I mean, look at his hockey reference. He has been at the lowest of lows, and he has been at the highest of highs. The guy has played in Arizona, Ottawa, and Florida. Okay, I mean, you can't get much higher. And he was in Florida last year when they went to the Stanley Cup. Okay, so he knows. This isn't a guy who has talent but doesn't know how to win. He knows how to win. He's gotten as close as you could to without actually raising a trophy. And so when we look back on this trade deadline, I got to give Julien Brisebois. I mean, there's really no case that you could make, given the circumstances where the Lightning didn't have many assets to play with. They weren't able to really gouge any interest. And I think, like I said at the time, or even afterwards, when things didn't develop as fast as we thought they would, there's probably not a lot of teams that want to do business with the Tampa Bay Lightning anymore, or for the time being. A lot of teams harbor some sort of animosity towards Tampa, given the success that they have had over the last couple of years. And who could blame them? Who could blame him? Why would you, whether you're in the West or in the East, why would you make a trade with a team that if you're really trying to win a cup, why would you give them a piece that eventually could come back and bite you in the butt in the cup final? And in the East, why would you even entertain the thought of making a trade? That's why both these players came from the West. That's why both these players came from teams that are not even going to be able to sniff the playoffs. These are both teams that have already made their offseason golf plans and vacation plans. So let me know in the comments below. I mean, my grade for the trade deadline moves, it's an A. I mean, if you want to talk me up to an A+, absolutely, we could talk about it, and you could sell me on it, and you'll probably will. So let me know in the comments, what is your trade deadline grade, especially a month later for the Tampa Bay Lightning? I mean, like I said, there really wasn't a lot of moves that you would have been able to make realistically. You would have had to have had the market change. Like I said at the time, the market changed significantly at that time. I mean, you're talking about a lot of teams passing on Noah Hannafin or Sean Walker or whatever, and I think that the Lightning are better off with Matt Dumba anyway. So coming up in just a little bit, we're going to talk about more about one of those players, Anthony Duclair. There's talk that the Lightning, or more so, there's talk, should the Lightning really force the issue in giving this guy a long-term deal in the offseason? We'll talk about that coming up in just a little bit. But first, we're going to talk about one of today's sponsors, and it is our first sponsor of today's show, and that is our friends over at Factor. Now, if you haven't heard of Factor, listen up. Eat stress-free this spring with Factor's delicious, ready-to-eat meals. Every fresh, never frozen meal is chef-crafted, dietitian-approved, and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. Choose from a weekly menu of 35 options, including popular options like Calorie Smart, Keto, Protein Plus, or vegan and veggie. Also discover more than 60 add-ons every week, like breakfast, on-the-go lunch, snacks, and beverages to help you stay fueled and feeling good all day long. What are you waiting for? Get started today and fuel up for your springtime goals. Looking for gourmet meals? Try meals that feature premium ingredients like filet mignon, shrimp, truffle butter, broccolini, and asparagus. So head to factormeals.com/LockedOnNHL50 and use the code LockedOnNHL50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next box. That's code LockedOnNHL50 at factormeals.com/LockedOnNHL50 to get 50% off your first box, 20% off your next box while your subscription is active. So as always, I want to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. If you haven't already done so, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We are on YouTube. The page is growing. The channel's growing. Go ahead, subscribe if you haven't already done so. Get ready for playoff hockey. It's just right around the corner. Oh, man, I wasn't sure at some point this year that we were going to have playoff hockey in Tampa. And thank goodness, like I said before, Julian Brees-Boss was able to, I wouldn't say swindle, I don't think that's the right term, but pull another ace out of the hole. And boy, did he really just get a diamond in the rough with Anthony Duclair out of San Jose. That was a move that I was really blown away by it, because I don't think he was on a lot of people's radars, at least for Tampa. I think it was more so him maybe getting moved to maybe a team a little bit lower down the pecking order than Tampa Bay, or not get moved at all. But man, since he has come to Tampa Bay, he has really, just like I said before, just really transformed this team. Not in a catastrophic way, but he gave them more of an edge in really a lot of areas of their game that they didn't have consistently throughout the course of the season. And on top of that, he's able to add that leadership. I said before, his extensive hockey resume spans over 10 seasons. He's been at the lowest of the low. He's been at the highest of the high. He's been obviously San Jose, Columbus, Chicago. Started out with the Rangers, was in Florida last year. He was in Arizona, so he knows. He's been around the league. He's, for the most part, I think, has seen it all. He's been to a Stanley Cup final, so he knows how to get there. Obviously, he's still trying to figure out how to actually win the whole damn thing. But he has played so well for Tampa. And this is something I didn't really want to think about, but it was brought up the other day by Elliot Friedman. I believe it was on 32 Thoughts. And he was talking about how interested he was to see if Tampa was going to make a move in terms of signing him in the offseason, and how aggressive maybe they were to go after and sign him. And my reaction to that is the Lightning will basically undo everything that they built upon from the trade deadline if they don't keep Duclair in Tampa Bay. And I'm sure there's going to have to be some sort of meeting place that these two parties are going to have to figure out. I mean, there's no doubt that the guy deserves a contract and deserves a long-term one at best. But as we all know, and as we have all seen over the last couple of years, it is very difficult to sometimes work things out monetarily with players here. One of the most, I think, unfortunate cases, I will say, that the Lightning weren't able to figure something out, and it actually came back to bite them, was, I wouldn't say figure things out, but they weren't able to figure out the money with other guys and able to keep this player. And that's the Ryan McDonough thing, the whole trade to Nashville. And, as we all know, that really did not do anything for the Lightning. Their defense has kind of been a mess since then, and they've had to slowly build things back up. But now that we're talking about Anthony Duclair, and he's most likely going to get signed, it's a very good time to be the Tampa Bay Lightning and have this problem, because quite a bit of money is coming off the books next year. You got obviously Stamkos, that we have talked about with it a lot in length on this show. So if you want to go back and listen to those episodes, go ahead. I'm sure you can find them, but there's that. I mean, he's not getting 8.5. I mean, Stamkos is still very, very good. He's 34 years old. That's the problem. He's not getting $8.5 million. He's maybe going to get 6.5, which I think is very reasonable for all parties, especially after the year he's had. And I think maybe 1 or 2 seasons are left to where we're going to see really this kind of consistent production. But Duclair is probably going to want a lot more money. He's making $3 million right now. I would imagine he's probably going to be in the ballpark, especially since he's getting first line minutes. That really he proved very early on that how integral of a part he is playing for this team. I would imagine that he is probably going to ask somewhere in the ballpark of, let's say, 5.5, maybe 5 if we could talk him down. But yeah, I would imagine, also given the fact that he's bounced around the league quite a bit, I think that you could lock him up. You could relatively convince him very, very quickly to settle for something a little lower, maybe than 5.5. Just so you prioritize length, give him 8 years. I mean, he's 28 years old right now, so that's another thing too. I mean, age is on your side. You have about 4 or 5 years until maybe he starts to go over the hump. But you get him for maybe 6-7 more years on paper, or maybe 7, and then his last 2 years after 5, his no trade clause is up. There's a lot of ways the Lightning could play this to where both sides could be happy and both sides will be able to agree on something that allows Anthony Duclair to stay in Tampa Bay. I just think it's going to be very important to keep him here. Like I said, you've built so much in such a short amount of time. We just got done evaluating that trade, and given the fact that he's only been here a little over a month and he means this much to the team, it really just shows you how good of a player he is. I know he played very well with the Panthers. I know he played decently well with Ottawa. So it's kind of weird, that he has kind of bounced around this much, but he's a late bloomer as well. So I think the Lightning have a very good opportunity to get a very high quality player. Like I said, that, you're really only, last time we saw a player like this was really out of Blake Coleman, and look what happened there. Unfortunately, you weren't able to work anything out, and now he's in Calgary, but you have a very good opportunity to continue building, and that's really what's the important thing here for the Lightning, as they are still very much a cup contender, especially if Vasilevsky and the older players on this team continue to play at their prime. It's still very important, regardless of where you think you are, to continue building. And that, I've said that in the past. It starts with Braden Point, Brandon Hagel, Nick Paul, and really now Anthony Duclair. I mean, on your back end, you have, we could have a conversation about Nick Perbix, but really it's Mikhail Sergachev, Eric Chernak. I know a lot of people may not be a fan of that name right now. Hayden Fleury, I think, is part of that group. But you still have to build towards the next generation of leaders on this Lightning team. And I think that Anthony Duclair is going to be a huge part of not only that generation, but future winning Lightning teams. So let me know in the comments below how you feel about that. I mean, what is the right number here? Like I said, maybe 5, 5.5. Try to prioritize length over value of AAV. If you could get him for maybe 5 a year for about 6, 7, 8, I mean, you're going to have to really give him 8 in order for him to settle for 5. Maybe chalk it full of incentives if you could, but I think the ball's in the Lightning's court and they gotta figure it out. So let me know in the comments below. What's the right number for you? And don't say anything lower than $3 million. Don't, because that's not realistic. But coming up in just a little bit, we're going to talk about other expectations, and that is the expectations of Mikhail Sergachev. When is he going to come back? What should we expect from his performance? We'll talk about that all coming up in just a little bit. But first, we're going to talk about our last sponsor of today's show, and that is our friends over at Indeed. Now, when you're drafting your fantasy team, something we've all done, do you ever wish you could handpick the best stars for your business team? If you're building your talent roster, you need Indeed. Now, Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire in one place. Don't spend hours on multiple job sites looking for candidates with the right skills when you could do it all with Indeed. Hate waiting? Indeed's U.S. data shows over 80% of Indeed employers find quality candidates whose resume on Indeed matches their job description the moment they sponsor a job. I always talk about it. One of my good friends started his own business about 4 months ago. It blew up in a matter of months, and he needed someone for payroll. He needs someone to work out logistical stuff, and he needed to fill those positions fast. So he went over to Indeed, and he found the right candidates almost instantaneously, and those people were able to start interviewing and basically start their jobs in a matter of weeks. And he did it all with Indeed. And now with Indeed, you only pay for quality applications that meet your hiring criteria. Now visit Indeed.com/lockedon to start hiring now. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Cost per application pricing not available for everyone. Need to hire? You need Indeed. So as always, one last time, I want to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. If you haven't already done so, please go ahead. Please go ahead. Subscribe to the channel on YouTube. Hit that notification button so as soon as the newest episode drops, you'll be notified. If you want to reach out to me or the show, go ahead. You could tweet to me at at Danky, DENKY, If you want to tweet questions, comments, go ahead, do so. I'll answer the questions on the show. If you want to send me a DM on the side, if you prefer to do that, go ahead and do that as well. If you want to contact the show or follow news surrounding the show, go to our social media pages, LO_Lightning on Twitter, as well as LockedOn_Lightning on Instagram. So we just got done talking about Anthony Duclair, a player who just give the man a damn contract. I wish we could do it now, but it's not going to happen. Obviously, money is not permitting it. You got to wait for some contracts to expire and, figure out the money, which, barring some unforeseen circumstances in which he becomes very unreasonable or the Lightning do try to shortchange him or whatever the case may be, I would be very inclined to believe that Anthony Duclair will be in a Lightning uniform for the next at least handful of years. So no worries there. Now, we're talking about other expectations here now, though. We're talking about Mikhail Sergachev, who, as you may have remembered, has played for this Lightning team, but not since February. He broke his leg in that first game back from the All-Star break. It was actually February 7th. That was the game against the Rangers in New York. He took a weird fall and a hit at the same time along the boards. It was an unfortunate play. It was nobody's fault. It was just one of those things that just happens. And it was a bad break. He got surgery a couple of days later, and now he's been back in recent weeks. It started with the infamous video of him running in the pool. And then a day later, he's on the ice. From everything I've heard, he's been seen around the arena quite a bit, and he's walking relatively normal. His skating in the videos that I've seen, he still is wearing the red jersey, which means that nobody should make contact with him and all that stuff. His skating, we've seen the videos of. If you haven't, they're on Twitter. There's really not much to tell if you're trying to figure out what kind of status he is at in terms of his ability to play at a high speed. The guy was just working on turns and puck handling. It wasn't anything strenuous. And, with the playoffs right around the corner, they're going to need this guy. And it is tough for us as fans. And I think even him, Sergachev himself, to really evaluate where he is. You're really not going to know for sure where this guy is at in terms of fitness. Because I'm sure he has been working out, but it's a whole different animal. Like I've said numerous times, I talked about this a ton when we were talking about in 2020, when Stamkos got hurt, he was out, pandemic hit, and it looked like he was coming back, got hurt again, and then he was back for the Stanley Cup final, that one shift. But that's really what we're going to have to see with Sergachev. And it makes me a little nervous because I don't, and I'm sure everyone's going to be extra cautious about this, but I don't want there to be a sense of urgency enough, regardless of if the Lightning are trying to close out a series or they're trying to survive another day. There needs to be a consensus that he is coming back just to play, and every shift is just going to get a gauge on him, on where he is physically. The Lightning should not have to bank on him coming back to save them from whatever scenario that they may be in or trying not to face. And that's goes back to my discussion that I've spoken about on at least the last couple episodes, where it's all about everybody having to play together on both sides of the puck, on both sides of the ice. And if you're bringing back Sergachev, you have to bring him back into the lineup with the expectation that he is not going to play the entirety of the game. Now, he could come back and play phenomenal, and that's great, and I love it. And I expect him, I don't expect him to come back and be completely useless. No, he's going to come back and make an impact. Now, as to his agility and his vision, that's going to be something that is going to be really something that we're going to have to all keep an eye on. That I'm sure John Cooper is going to keep an eye on. If he doesn't feel like Sergachev is caught up, he's not going to give him a lot of ice time. I mean, we may very well see him play 4 minutes. And that's just something the Lightning are going to have to deal with if they're all right with that, So my expectations are for him to just come back, I would imagine, in the second round of the playoffs if the Lightning do advance past Boston, as it kind of looks like that's what's going to be the first round matchup for the Tampa Bay Lightning. And I would expect, like I said, 4 minutes out of him, maybe 5. I think Cooper's going to put him on spots on the ice where it's not going to be too grueling or crazy to start off. I think we might see him on some power play time. For PK, I don't know. Like I said, he hasn't played that whole well of good defense this year. And coming back from a leg injury as catastrophic as this one, your side-to-side lateral movement may not be up to par with these guys who have played nonstop all year. The adrenaline's going through the roof, and Sergachev starting from zero, pretty much. I know it's 2 months, but it's 2 months. So let me know in the comments below how you feel. Should the Lightning just milk this as much as possible? Should they only bring him back in do or die situations? But if he's ready to go, game 1 of the playoffs, do you start him? I don't think that there's any wrong answer depending on the scenario there. So let me know in the comments below there, and we'll be back tomorrow to recap tonight's possible win against the Ottawa Senators. So yeah, go ahead, subscribe to the podcast, give me a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form, and yeah, we'll be back. So that's been it for this episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Danker. I'll talk to you in the next one.